Last time, we were talking about some of the different ways that people go about subsistence. That is, the process of making the natural world into something they can live on, something they can subsist on. Now, when you talk about that, naturally, you tend to focus on material things, on what people have available to eat. But of course, subsistence involves more than that. The way you make a living affects just about everything you do, from the way you build your houses to the way you raise your children. Some of those influences are pretty obvious. If you're a forager, a hunter-gatherer, for example, you're not going to live in a city. That kind of dense population won't work if you're relying on naturally occurring resources. You probably won't be literate. That is, you probably won't have reading and writing because nothing in your daily life requires reading and writing, and you don't have the infrastructure to produce paper, printing presses, and all that kind of stuff. Your religion will probably include a lot of animal figures, since you make a living in a way that ensures that you will know a great deal about a lot of different species. There are a lot of things you can predict about a culture just by knowing how it does subsistence. Some of the effects of subsistence, though, are a bit more subtle and hard to predict. They can crop up in areas that you might not at first suspect. One of them, for example, has to do with gender relations. Take, say, cultivation. When we were talking about cultivation last time, we mentioned the distinction between horticulture and agriculture. Horticulture is kind of like gardening, something you do with relatively simple tools and that doesn't involve methods of intensification. Agriculture, on the other hand, uses things like plows and irrigation systems and terracing to intensify soil use and generate greater yields. Now think for just a moment about the way that these involve men and women differently. Imagine, for example, the distinction between bush fallow horticulture, which uses rakes and hoes for cultivation, and early plow agriculture, which involves driving a plow through the soil, often with the aid of a draft animal. Now, the first one of those is open to just about anyone, man or woman. Just about anyone can garden. Turning soil over with a hoe or a pitchfork isn't something that requires a great deal of upper body strength. So in early horticultural societies, both men and women tend to be actively involved in food production. One result of this is that marriage, plural marriage, can represent a real economic opportunity for men. A man with 3 wives has a household with triple the production power of a man with 1 wife. A man who wants to become powerful, therefore, is going to strive to have multiple spouses. And indeed, polygyny, that is, a system in which one man can marry multiple women, is quite common in horticultural societies, and it tends to be associated with people who are trying to achieve political power. And indeed, in all societies, people are trying to achieve some political power, and horticultural societies tend to be ones in which there are a lot of opportunities for that. Now, if that society were to move on to plow agriculture, on the other hand, that would change. Early plow agriculture requires a great deal of physical strength. You have to control large and powerful draft animals, and you have to manhandle a plow through hard soil. This is generally more feasible for men than for women. And it's particularly difficult for women if they're trying to combine it with childcare. If you're carrying around a baby, it's not something you'd be able to do that's consistent with driving a plow. That means that in early plow agricultural societies, the work in the fields is done primarily by men, especially the initial work of plowing the field that determines how big a plot of land you're going to be able to farm. In this kind of a system, a man with 3 wives doesn't have 3 times the labor power. He has 3 times the number of people that need to be fed off the land, but he has the same amount of labor power as if he just had 1 wife. Because of this, polygyny, plural marriage, is much less common in societies with early plow agriculture. Not only that, the status of women can show a significant decline. As women move from being grain producers to grain consumers, their political influence often goes down. They tend to have less prominent roles in religion, less voice in the decisions that are made in the group, and often fewer property rights. The way that you make a living, in other words, can affect areas of culture that don't, on first glance, seem really closely connected to the way that you grow food. Always bear that in mind. Whether you're in the contemporary United States or you're in the prehistoric Near East, there is always a connection between what you make and who you are. And that means that when we try to understand cultural systems, whether it's gender relations or religious imagery, or even things like artistic styles in literature, we have to begin by taking a close look at the subsistence systems that underlie them.